Hello and welcome to the Health Oddity Podcast, episode 157. We are moving into our fourth year of releasing a weekly podcast every Friday afternoon. And we are joined by a very, very special guest today, who himself has been around for a long time, certainly in the online space, the podcasting, the kind of the YouTube, the content creation, just kind of social media and online omnipresence, which we will talk about in a minute. I will introduce him shortly, but before we do that, let's catch up. We are just myself and Pete today, as Paul is having a well-earned break. Myself and Pete have obviously been on holiday recently. Paul is having a little break now. So how are you doing, Pete? Are you okay?
I am. I would say I'm very, very relaxed after my holiday, but I'm not, because we're closing in on the end of the first week back, and I've had to catch up with everybody and do everything. So I'm a bit tired.
Yeah, no. When you've been away for a week or two, and then you get back, within that, by the end of the first week back, the kind of the holiday is a distant memory, isn't it? With
and it wasn't exactly like a relaxing holiday as well, because we were walking up and down mountains and stuff like that. So it was just amazing. It was really good though. It was really good. The Lake District in the UK. Go. It's such a great place, magical. We're going to retire there because it's fantastic.
Excellent.
And it's a pity Paul isn't here, actually, because then I can't do the joke that I had prepared about the amount of hair that we've now got on the podcast. Because obviously Paul, as our esteemed guest won't know, Paul is bald without a beard. You're bald with a beard. I've got hair and a beard, and then this man's just taking it. He's just taken the trophy. But
it's almost like he almost is like Michael J. Fox from Teen Wolf from the 80s. Isn't it? Yeah, it's got that look, that kind of, I used to love that film. That's one of my favorites growing up. I must have watched that about 50 times. Before we start, I just got a few well dones and congratulations for guests and friends of the show. First of all, two former guests of the show, Becca Roberts, who came second at Europe's Strongest Woman last weekend, and Donna Moore, who also came second in the under 83 kilo class. So well done to them. I was watching loads of stuff online over the weekend. Also, Ben Morris, friend of the show and former guest, recently was competing up in London. He was actually at the same event, but he was involved in kettlebell sport. And I think he was doing was he doing like a clean and jerk kind of set, or was it a half marathon or something? It was some big weight for some long amount of time. I think it was half marathon actually. 30 minutes. And well done as well to Alex Nicole Bennett, who won her first strong woman contest, Essex Strongest Novice. Well done to her. Well done to Suze Hawkins as well, who won Horsham's Strongest Woman over the last few weeks. And Lauren Emery in the next couple of weeks is going to be competing in the kettlebell pentathlon at the I think it's the English Championships or the British Championships in Northampton, which hopefully I'll be there watching, and then she's going to hopefully go on to the Worlds as well. So lots of good stuff been going on with guests and friends of the show over the last few weeks. Now on to this week. We are joined. We've mentioned his name a number of times on this podcast, and I know definitely when we've had Dan John on as well. We had Alex Salkin on a few weeks back, didn't we, as well? And I think that was actually broadcast from this guest's house, if I remember rightly.
We've already been in your house.
We've already been in your house. Okay. So welcome to Pat Flynn. How are you doing, Pat?
Good, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Now, for those of you who've been around kettlebells for a while, I suppose kettlebells, but all types of fitness, but certainly kettlebells specifically, you've probably, like I say, he's been all over. I don't just say social media, but kind of the online presence for many, many years. And we were just saying before we came on that Pete and myself have kind of followed what he does for a long time. Pat is the first guest in our fourth year of podcast, which is great. Chronicles of Strength. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a content creator, a writer, a musician, a minimalist, a generalist, a podcaster, a coach,
a philosopher.
everything. What's that?
A philosopher as well.
A philosopher and a writer about philosophy and everything. So we're not really sure where we're going to go today, but we are going to start off with Pat. And Pat, I just wanted to start with a quote that I got it, actually was reading up on some things and saw it today. Not sure if I think it's still appropriate for what you do, because Alex also mentioned it. It's from like an old Breaking Muscle profile, I think, when you used to write a lot on there.
Oh boy, that's a while ago. Yeah,
going back, but I think it's still appropriate because it was. I thought it might be a good place to kind of kick off a conversation. It's Pat Flynn is a fitness minimalist and believes that any exercise program will improve in direct ratio to the number of things that you can leave out of it that shouldn't be there.
Sounds right to me.
That sounds like you. Yes.
Sounds right. It sounds right to me. Yeah.
Sounds right.
I always get nervous when somebody reads anything of mine, let alone something that's like 5 minutes old, because like everybody else, you write something, you produce something, and then like you look at it 2 weeks later and you're like, oh man, no human could ever be that dumb, right? Nobody could ever write that poorly, right? But that one, you know what? I think that one's all right. I think I'm.
Well, that's the thing. I read it. I know it was done.
Thank you for finding that diamond in the rough, right? Yeah.
Well, I know it was written a while ago, but I read it and I thought it kind of is quite a good quote to sort of maybe start from, or maybe to use as a bit of a launch pad to move forwards.
Sure.
But because I thought it's still appropriate. It's not, it's nothing too outlandish or dated. So I suppose really to begin with, because Alex mentioned you when we were speaking to him as well around minimalism, and I suppose that. That's, I suppose, what you may be not known for, but it's something that's associated with you. And a lot of what you do is I suppose, kind of minimalism within training and within fitness. But what is fitness minimalism to you, and why, and why do you like it, or why did you, what is it about that draws you to it?
Yeah, good. So my whole approach to fitness for many years now has been kind of founded upon two core philosophical pillars. And those pillars are minimalism on the one hand and generalism on the other. And the way I like to break it down is like this. Minimalism is really just the attitude or the method or the approach. Generalism is the outcome. And so it might actually be helpful if we start with the latter and then go into the former. So for me, I'm somebody who's always been interested in a lot of different things. And I've never been particularly interested in being the best in the world at any one of them. But I think that there is conceptual space between the idea that you can either be like a Michael Phelps or a jack of all trades, but master of none. I've always felt you could be a master of a lot of different things because there's a difference between true mastery and like Michael Phelps, best in the world, right? So for me, generalism is something that I think can be applied to your whole of life. In fact, my green book right there is all about that. But in fitness, it means focusing on, being generally physically prepared more than a hyper specialist, right? So for me, fitness was always sort of something that was supporting other things in my life that I was interested in. Martial arts is another background of mine. That's originally how I got into kettlebells, was through the Taekwondo world. So whatever else fitness was to me, it wasn't something that I like needed to be the best at, right? It's just something that I had to be good to great, or at least fairly competent at across a broad range of abilities. So to me, the generalist is exactly that. Somebody who wants to be sort of ready for or capable of almost anything, good to great, or at least fairly competent, right? In terms of strength and mobility and being decently muscled. And here's an important aspect as well, that for the generalist, health and fitness should be mutually harmonious, not in conflict with one another. So fitness is the ability to complete a task. Health is something like the ideal interplay of the organs and bodily systems. As you gentlemen definitely know, and as many of your gentle listeners, I'm sure, are aware, people can pursue fitness to such an extent that it actually takes away their health. It expenses their health. To me, that's not what it means to be a generalist. Whatever you're doing as a generalist, minimally shouldn't be taking away from your health in your fitness pursuits, but hopefully actively increasing your health and vitality and energy and all that, right? So that's the outcome. That's what we're going for. We want to be robust generalists. We want to be just, capable of whatever life throws at us. We're not worried about being a professional bodybuilder or power lifter or anything like that. And we want to be healthy. Okay, so that's what we're going for. And I think it's very clear as a coach or a business owner to always have a clear mission. Like, this is what we're going for. So if you're on board with this, come on. If not, no big deal, but I'm not your guy, right? And then minimalism is the attitude we take towards that. And the way I think about minimalism is so obvious, it's almost trivial. But just bear with me, because I think there's still a number of important points we can make. That a minimalist is just somebody who's always trying to find that ideal intersection between effectiveness, which is doing the right things, and efficiency, which is doing things right. Now, so understood, like, when would anybody not want to be a minimalist? Like, when does anybody like, yeah, I want to be ineffective, I want to be wasteful or inefficient? But the problem isn't necessarily what you want, it's what you get. And are you actually a minimalist? So it's this constant sort of reorientation I'm asking people to take, to really always prioritize, to be pulling weeds, to be focusing and reassessing of, am I actually being a minimalist? Am I really doing the right things for my given goal at the time? And am I doing those things right? And of course, those two things can come apart, effectiveness and efficiency. Just to give a quick example, maybe I want to improve my upper body strength. Okay, but I choose to just do a bunch of running. Running's fine, that's great, but it's not very effective for building upper body strength. And maybe I'm really efficient in my running technique and I've got a really well mapped out running plan. Great. So I'm efficient, but I'm not effective, right? Conversely, I might say, okay, maybe I'll do some military presses and stuff like that. Okay, now we're more effective, but maybe my plan is very poorly designed. I don't have the variables dialed in, the intensity, the frequency, the volume, the density, and maybe my technique is crap. So, okay, I'm kind of effective, but now I'm also very inefficient, right? So the minimalist is somebody who's always just trying to get these things, intersecting in the most ideal way possible. Now, of course, you're never going to be perfect with it, right? And it's always a moving target. But for me, this is the perspective we should always be taking as we're pursuing our goals and as we're sort of evolving, and getting closer to those goals. Because, as you know, things change along the way. So we constantly have to take another look and always reassess. So does that start to answer your question? I hope. Sorry, it was a long response, probably longer than it had to be. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I think it's good because many people can think minimalist training is all just about picking 2 or 3 exercises, and just doing, a couple of exercises. And we had Brooks Cubic on as well from Dinosaur Training, who obviously talks a lot about abbreviated training and, but I think that the way you kind of framed that up to begin with as a kind of a big picture, and actually the exercises are kind of like the last piece of the puzzle, aren't they? But the mindset and the thinking behind the selection and the formulation of why you're doing the exercises is the most important part of being a minimalist. So,
you make a great point. If somebody just thinks of minimalism as doing very little, that's not what I'm about. Minimalism is doing the least that you need to get the outcome, and in many cases, the least is a lot. It's a lot, right? Especially if you've got big goals. It's just not doing anything wasteful. So I would say, put the idea of just doing very little aside. That's not what I mean by minimalism. It's just doing the least. And depending on what you're going after, that could be many hours of effort a day. But the idea is at least it's the most productive type of effort. Yeah,
I shared a quote the other day that I think I'm sure it was from Dan. It might have been in his Easy Strength Omnibook or one of his recent podcasts, but it was from I'm not going to pronounce the surname, Henk Kragenhoff, but do as little as needed, not as much as possible, which I suppose kind of ties into the idea of stripping away the superfluous and the unnecessary and the, like you say in your original quote that I shared, where the number of things you can leave out that shouldn't actually be there. And I suppose people do so much stuff, so much fluff to fill time or to feel like they should do this, or they're told they need to do this. And we often talk about it, Pete, don't we, in terms of actually being as minimal as you can, but also, everything that Pat said really is spot on, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, Pat's been a massive influence on the way I've kind of looked at stuff. And I read that book that when it came out, the How to Be Good at Almost Everything, and it was really interesting because that quote you've just said, the master of all trades, jack of all trades, master of none. Sorry, that isn't the full quote, is it? Because then it goes on to go, but it's something like, but very often more useful than a master of one. That's the full quote, isn't it? So you can become really good at one thing, but you're really good at that one thing. And that's what that book's all about, isn't it? It's like, well, you can become like 99% good at this thing and better than most people in the world. Or you can become like 70% good at that thing and that thing and that thing. And then you become more of a useful person. And that was my takeaway from it anyway. And because that's the thing, if you take, say, health and fitness in of itself, that's great. And if you put lots and lots of stuff into that, then work falls by the wayside, doesn't it? And family falls by the wayside. So actually, you know, it's only what you can recover from in that and still live the rest of your life as well. And I've really taken that on board, because I used to be all about work when I worked in an office, and then I was all about myself and family, and then I wasn't making any money, and then it was like, whoa, hang on, how do I do all of this? So, and that book really helped, actually, because it was something that I thought, I don't know, I suppose in society it's kind of like just graft, and you know, you see it all over the internet, don't you? Graft and hustle and work and all of that. And then you see people like you, Pat, who do all these things, and you think, God, you must be super busy all the time. But then you get to see that you spend loads of time with your family and all that as well. So it was like, yeah, it was a massive influence on me.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's I'm really glad to hear that. You definitely got the thesis correct. And I am massively busy, but I'm very good, and this is something I talk about in the book. And it's because I take this minimalist approach of compartmentalizing, right? Like I have certain times for certain duties and projects throughout the day that I live an extremely monotonous lifestyle, right? Like people think that running your own business or being a writer must be very exotic and going to all these fancy, no, I'm doing pretty much the same exact things every single day, right? I wake up at the same time. I have my same morning routine. I do my research. I do my writing. I do my workout. I do my music practice, all that stuff, right? Every single day, certain blocks of time are carved out. But then also importantly to what you say, Peter, like come around 4 o'clock every day, no matter how well or how poorly I've done with what came before that, that's it. It's done. Now I'm going to go hang out with the wife and kids as well, right? And so I have these sort of hard delineations of my schedule that, yeah, I'm extremely busy. You know, it's go, go, go from when I wake up until about 4 p.m., right? And for me, to get the most out of all that time, I have to be sort of a ruthless minimalist of it with all this stuff. But it's still an enormous amount of work and effort that goes into it. So I'm not doing like this 4-hour work week nonsense that people talk about that doesn't exist. At least it's never existed for me. But what I do is yes, it's monotonous, but it's also very enjoyable. It's always challenging. It's always causing me to grow in important ways. So I'm never bored, even though I live this sort of very monotonous routine. I don't equate monotonous with boredom by any means. Mm-hmm.
But here's a question, because this used to get me, was like, so the monotony, mine's exactly the same. I get up, I train some guys, I walk the dog, go and train some more guys, write a Facebook post. That's pretty much it. And then, but what I also do is, so like you say, you finish at like 4 p.m. I schedule in like some fun time as well, like stuff we're going to do. That's kind of, it's almost like scheduling in spontaneity, if that makes sense. Because, you know, people go, I love to be spontaneous. It's like, yeah, but you never get anything done because you're here and here and you start things and never finish anything. Whereas, you know, then other people can look at it and go, well, but that's not spontaneous if you're scheduling it in. And it's like, well, yeah, it just means that that's time when I can do whatever I like.
That's right. Yes. No, that's a wonderful point. And I think that there's two immediate connections we can draw there. One is just in my own life. Yeah. Like even throughout the day, like I need my little breaks here and there. So like every day after lunch, I'm just doing something fun with my kids. It might just be playing a few rounds of Mario Kart on the Nintendo, for example. Right. Which can get hyper competitive as well. Not always relaxing, right? Especially since they're getting better and better. Like dad can't like totally recline anymore during, like I got to sit up sometimes. I get a little bit sweaty, you know? So, but also in your training, right? Like I think it's very valuable when you have a training plan to kind of have that scheduled call it a variety day or spontaneity. Like, this is a day where I could just kind of explore, have fun, if you will, different, like whatever it is. Maybe I'm just going to go outside and tumble and practice handstands, or maybe I'll just grab a single kettlebell and just like see what I can make up on the spot, whatever. But yeah, it's spontaneous, but it's a scheduled spontaneity. I think it's brilliant. I think that's absolutely right. I have that in my just sort of daily work schedule. Also, I think it's important to have in your actual training program. And so long as it's scheduled appropriately, it's not going to be counterproductive to everything else you're doing. In fact, I think it'll enhance it in many ways. Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing. Some people that we probably all have seen before have lived their life 100% on kind of spontaneity and variety and excitement and whims, and maybe they're all of their training is, you know, fun and flowing and do what I feel like on the day, and there's no structure there. So I think, I don't know how you, I mean, this is a big subject we've spoke about a few times, I think, on the podcast, but how do you, I'll be really interested actually into your opinion on how do you view kind of balance and you know, balance through different areas of life. And people talk about work-life balance and balance within training and balance within how you live, because what's your kind of take on that?
That's a really hard question for me to answer, because in one sense I think I'm very balanced, but in another sense I think I'm sort of balanced because I live on the extremes, if that makes sense, right? So, you know, I go all in on pretty much anything I do, whether it's the business, whether it's a book project, whether it's time with my family, and I find ways to kind of go in on all that stuff. But it is an all-in mentality, if that makes sense. So I don't know if somebody would consider that balanced or not. For me, it's not. The balance is so ambiguous. To me, it's a matter of, do I have my priorities straight, right? And some things definitely do deserve more attention and more energy and more of your time than others. I think it's, in a sense, admirable to work hard on your business, but I think there's something truly vicious about that if it's at the expense of your family, right? But at the same time, it's all nice and wonderful to spend time with your kids, but if you're not able to actually feed and educate them because you're not working, that itself is vicious, right? So to me, it's a matter of understanding what your obligations actually are, prioritizing and making sure that you're an adult and you get them done. So I'm always, you know, kind of and same thing, like one day of work every Sunday, like I don't do anything but just hang out with the family, like no business related stuff whatsoever. So I think that's really important too. But all the other days, you know, it's serious work. It's serious work with the books. It's serious work in the gym. It's serious work on the instruments. We homeschool. It's serious work with the children and all that, right? It's serious work with the nutrition, the dieting. It's all very, very serious work. So in that sense, like, the ratio of serious work to rest is like very much skewed on the side of serious work. But I think that at least as far as I can tell, we've got our priorities pretty well worked out. Nobody's perfect, right? There's always times I look back and like, I should have allocated more time here or there or stuff. So it's always a work in process. I don't know if somebody would call that balanced, but it certainly seems to have worked for us. Yeah.
Can I just, so how many children have you got, Pat? Just out of
I've got 5.
I thought it was about 5. Yeah. So 5 children, all homeschooled as well.
That's right. Yep. Wife is home. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think one of the words you used earlier, which is really important, with regards to the discussion around balance that we're having, is you said about compartmentalize, you know, and the fact that you can have these pockets of time where you are 100% all in on the writing or the music or the training, or, you know, being with the kids and homeschooling and everything else. And I think is that around sort of structure and discipline? Is that kind of something that's important when trying to manage things like that? Because
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
yes. And environment as well. You know, part of the idea of, you know, just getting things done is having the external structures in place, right? External time structures. Like I know from, for example, once we're done with this podcast for an hour, that's my weekly guitar lesson. Because I have a coach and everything that matters to me. I think it's extremely important to have coaches. No matter how good you think you are at something, you need to be pushed by somebody else always, right? And that's scheduled every single time. I've got my time for writing. I've got my time for working out. And not just that, but I have a space for each of you. Like I'm kind of weird. Like if you follow me around throughout the day, you think I'm probably a little bit weird, right? Because I have like this space here where I do my podcast is not the space where I work out or do my writing or that, because there's something about me. I think this is the case for a lot of people, that you get certain signals from your environment once you get into routines. I'm in like, it's how, this is why they tell you to reserve the bedroom just for sex and sleep, right? Because if you start doing other stuff in the bedroom, your mind gets confused and it can mess up your sleep patterns, right? And same thing. So like, okay, clearly we make strong associations with environments. I want it to be that like when I'm in this environment, my brain automatically focuses. It knows like this is where we do a reading, or this is where we do a writing, or this is where we practice nothing else, right? Especially if you're trying to do a lot of things in life, I think you need those special spaces. Like this is how I think extreme you need to be with compartmentalization, not just time, but literal physical spaces, or at least a change of scenery. I don't know, maybe you just turn 90 degrees when you switch tasks or something like that. If you don't have all the rooms there, something like that, right?
Because I think that created a big problem for many people when people were in like lockdown and things like that, because suddenly everyone was living at home, working at home, homeschooling for the first time.
Yeah.
Obviously it's something you do, usually, but homeschooling for the first time, maybe trying to train at home. And everyone was at home for the first time, mum, dad, kids, everything's going on at home. And that was a real challenge, obviously, for lots of people.
Yes.
To be working where you live, and obviously many people now, a few years later, are kind of still in that kind of a hybrid working environment where they're working from home more now than they were previously, or maybe 100% still. So yeah, I think that environment, that separation, that like you say, physical physical compartmentalization, and also kind of mental and emotional compartmentalization.
It's a tough word. I always trip over it too. I've been saying it for years and it still never comes out right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's fascinating. And
yeah,
having so much on your plate and so many plates that you're spinning yourself, it's really interesting to hear that you've got. I've watched some of your videos as well. And when you're training, some of them, I don't know if it's actually where you train or where you film your videos out on kind of like a deck.
Yes. It's just right out back. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And is that where you actually train?
No,
and
no,
record
it's not.
videos?
That's where I film my videos. But generally, I prefer to train at the gym for this very reason. Like I'm at home so much that for me, it's better to have a training place that's outside of the house, because I'm generally at home. So like when we go just to the local Y most of the time. But I don't film there because it's weird putting other people on camera, right? So I just film the workouts at home for the purposes of demonstration. But my actual training is at the Y, because once I step into the Y, I know what I'm focused on, right? Whereas at home, there's a million other things going on. So no, yeah, for me, it's right in line with everything that we've been talking about. I have this specific environment where training happens, and it's not at home. Now, look, push comes to shove. If we can't get to the Y, I'll get it done at home, and I'll go out back with the kettlebells or something like that. But the vast majority of the time, I'm not training at home.
Yeah, no, I think that there is something that, like you say, switches on in the mind when if you are going to train at a facility, at a gym, and you walk through the door and immediately, I'm here to do this, and then when I've done this, I'm going to go back home. So I think that kind of structure is so important. How do you find that, Pete? Because you obviously you teach your classes outside, but you train at home, don't you? Is that something that you manage? Okay.
Yeah, I live in a 2-bed flat, so I haven't got all the rooms available that Pat's just been talking about. So I could get really angry about that and say, how dare you? It's like, it's like people who say about David Goggins. It's like, well, if I didn't have a job, I'd be training all day as well. And he turned around and said, no, you wouldn't. But anyway, all those rooms. I could get angry about that. How dare you? How dare you with your big house and it? But like my living room's quite big, and it's done in sort of bits. There's like a dining area here and a seating area over there, and I've got a bit there, which is my bit. And because I minimalist training, I use kettlebells and I don't need much space, and it's literally just there, and that's where I do it all. And that's there, and then I work here, and I sit over there, and that's it. And it feels nice when I'm over there. I'm not thinking about work. When I'm over here, it's podcast and stuff. When I'm over there, I train. So with what Pat said there about, even like turning this way or turning that way, and it does change your brain. And years ago, I would have thought that was a load of horse poo. But while I've been looking, because lots of people don't even think about these things, do they? And then it's like, actually, the way your neurology works, it associates certain things with certain stresses or certain things that make you feel good. Those,
That's right.
like certain different ways. So yeah, so I've been very like what do you call it, feng shui or whatever it's called. That's a
Feng
thing.
shui or whatever. Yeah. Well, that's a great point. Yeah, Peter, it's yes, that's right. We've got very fortunate to have lots of rooms in the house, but look, wasn't always this case. When I first started my business, I was dirt poor, living across from Section 8 housing, like had no space at all, right? But you still find ways to make it work. Maybe it's just a corner of a room, for example. I just wouldn't decide to swing a kettlebell like right where I'm doing my writing, for example, right? Because my temptation is that my mind will keep going back to the other thing. And it's not to say you can't get it done, right? Of course you could get it done if you're determined enough. But it's wasteful, right? Like I don't want, when I'm doing my workout, I don't want my mind to keep being drawn somewhere else if it doesn't have to be, right? Because there's decision fatigue that happens throughout the day. So I'm not saying that you can't be productive without any of this. I'm saying the reason I'm able to maintain the output that I do, which is pretty high, right, is because of these sort of structures I've set in place. I'd still be able to get, I'm sure, a lot of it done if I didn't go to different places of the house to do different things or the gym, right? But I'd be a lot more tired and I wouldn't get it all done as well, if that makes sense. So you just kind of learn these things as you go along, almost of necessity. And a lot of the things I do have been of necessity, like just hard deadlines and stuff you have to meet. It helps to be, under the gun, so to speak. Some of the, sometimes you don't know what you're really capable of until like something else is forcing you to prove yourself as well. Yeah. Voluntary, usually involuntarily, stuff like that. But
this is a huge subject actually, because just thinking about this, my girlfriend is a teacher. Well, she's in education, and sometimes she'll work from home because she doesn't teach classes anymore. So sometimes she'll work from home because she's got like a Zoom call to do or some training to present, kind of like this, or like, over Zoom. But there's 3 people in her tiny little office at work. So she's like, well, I'll do it at home because then I'm not disturbing them, right? But then I'm here doing my session over there, like and then she'll either be presenting or she'll be getting ready to do work. And then she'll have got an email and she'll be like, oh, I've just had this email, and kind of, how people do, moaning about emails that you get that just turn up and stuff. And I don't do it, but I find myself sometimes having to stop myself saying, can you just not talk to me, please? Because I'm in a different space. So when I'm on my own, when she's at work, it's fine. But when on those days, which doesn't happen very often, and it's not a criticism or anything like that, by the way, if she's listening, which she won't be. But it's not a critic, but it's I just noticed that. So I try to just stay in the zone, so to speak. But yeah, it's really interesting because, like I say, years ago, I would never have thought about any of this stuff. But the more I think about it, and the more like listen to people like you who talk about it like in this way, it makes huge sense.
Yeah, and and you have to decide what you're not going to do as well. So first off, what you said is absolutely right and reasonable. And same thing with my wife and the children. Like, they know when dad's doing this thing, like, you don't go in that space, right? And like, there's a pre-established understanding there, and it's all cool because it's pre-established, right? The other thing is, I remember, I forget how long ago this was, but I read one of Stephen King's book. I think it's On Writing. It's been a long time. I might be misremembering, but he was so big about this, right? I'm not a huge Stephen King fan in terms of his work, but nobody can deny that he's really impressive with his output, right? So I'm always curious, like, what are these guys up to? And his thing was shut the door, right? It's pretty clear what he means by that, right? Like, nothing gets into this space. No distractions, nothing else. This space is for getting the job done. That's it, right?
I was going to say, I met Dan Kennedy, the marketing guy, Dan Kennedy, before he died, probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
He's still alive, man.
No, he's not, is he?
They thought he was going to die. He was in hospice, and then he had like a legit miraculous recovery. Like, I'm virtually certain that he is still alive, right? Okay. Like, he literally wrote his deathbed letter, but then from hospice, no kidding. Okay. But I'm almost positive. We should Google right now that he because I think
can you check, Pete? Because I don't want to miss but I think it was an event. I think it was actually the first event that I met Dan John at, and Dan Kennedy. It was in Florida, 2012 maybe, and
Did he take you around Disney World? That's his favorite thing. He likes to take people around
Epcot.
Disney World.
Yeah, we went around Epcot with him.
I did that with him too at one year.
Yeah, it was great. And but I remember him talking about writing. So I was going to ask you about writing, because I know that he says that he just had a room with an old-fashioned typewriter in it, and it didn't. So he wasn't on the computer. He didn't have access to the internet. He couldn't get distracted. It was just a room with a table and a chair and a typewriter. And it may be an electric typewriter, but it was just a typewriter. It wasn't a computer. So when he went in there to write, he was zero distractions, And I suppose that's the ultimate, managing the environment, managing so when you're writing, when you go into writing mode and you've maybe got a block of, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours to write, if that's how you work, do you... Yeah. Are you kind of like shut off from all distractions, and that's you managing your environment?
Yeah, most of them. So I'm not a typewriter guy. I do like the efficiency of modern word processors, right? So I don't go quite that, like, it sounds romantic, but like I don't think it was, like I say, I don't buy it. I don't buy it, right?
It might have been a word processor, like
hey man, I don't doubt that maybe that works for some people, but his general point is definitely sound, right? And I'm a Kennedy guy too, man. I grew up in the direct response world, and in one of my earliest clients when I was training somebody in college was a direct student of Dan Kennedy, and he saw what I was trying to do, and he's like, let me introduce you to some people, right? And then just kind of got looped into that whole world of direct response and all those great copywriters and stuff like that. And they talk a lot about this productivity stuff. I got a lot of it from that world, right? Kennedy being one of the major influences himself. I have to know if he's still alive. So please, somebody figure that out, right?
Google it, but I can't.
If he isn't, I'm going to feel bad for like giving people hope. But anyways, to your question is, yes, I shut so many things down. I mean, in general, I have a policy against social media. So I'm on social media. I post my business content and my podcast and social media, stuff like that. But you'll never see me like talking with people on it, really. I'm not ever engaging in threads or arguing back and forth with people, and so because I have a pre-established policy that Pat Flynn never does that stuff. Because for me, it is, however useful it might be, is so limited compared to how my time otherwise could be spent, right? So I refuse to ever get drawn into social media back and forth like that, right? It's just a strict policy of mine. Like, that is almost never violated, right? So that's one thing. I also have just literal those blockers on your rectangle, your phone, that like after 15 minutes it just like shuts down. We all need a little bit of help to make sure we're not doing the scrolling too much on the phone. So those things can help. But either way, when I'm doing the writing, right, it's just a Word document that's up. You shut down the other tabs. You make sure that none of that is going on. And then importantly, if you are and I think for most of us, the biggest distraction is social media, that if you're doing anything with social media, that you have time bounds on that. And you also have a time dedicated for that, whether it's daily or weekly, but here's a time when I'm going to do my social media efforts. the Facebook. You know, I like the daily because I think it's important to kind of be kind of organic and frequent with social media stuff rather than like schedule. When you schedule stuff in advance, it just seems so robotic and artificial. I don't like that. I never like that. So just some daily block of, okay, here's where I'm going to do whatever social media stuff I think is important. Respond to people on my own stuff, I'll do that, right? But never like going off of it just because that's important for engagement and community building. And I've got my own Facebook group, so I make sure I dedicate an amount and certain time to that and members in there. So when I say this, when it comes to social media stuff I don't do, I mean like, you know, go pick fights or respond to people picking fights with me on Twitter, stuff like that, right? That's such a waste of time. So yes, yeah, hardcore compartmentalization there. You also said for writing, some people like, you know, hitting a certain number of words. I've always done well with time blocks. You know, 2 hours, 3 hours. For me, that's a pretty realistic and productive writing range between 2 to 3 hours every day. Yeah.
Yeah. And just with regards to obviously fitness and training, you mentioned kind of taekwondo and martial arts was the kind of gateway, I suppose, to strength training and kettlebells. And with regards to music, which I know is another kind of, you mentioned your guitar lessons and things, which I know is another sort of big part of your life that's kind of compartmentalized. When did music kind of come in? Is that been something that's been like a lifelong kind of passion?
Yes. Yeah. Very, very young. You know, when some of my earliest memories are just like my mom driving like an absolute maniac and blaring AC/DC and Van Halen. And like as soon as my consciousness gelled, right, like AC/DC's Back in Black album was just like already a permanent fixture within it, right? And I'm like, whatever that sound is, I want to be able to make that sound, right? So started guitar, you know, pretty young. Always had great instructors. You know, originally I always thought I was going to be writing or music professionally, what I was going to do. And it ended up being more of the writing, but music has always been there. I'm in a band, so we gig around a lot in the Milwaukee area. Also produce a lot of my own music. Offers no economic benefit to my life whatsoever. It's just a pure source of joy and challenge and creativity for me. But it's also been important in terms of like, there's certain things you learn from a musical education and musical discipline that absolutely spills over to other areas of life. I mean, so much of the principles in the gym, I realized I sort of that I think helped me be successful. Because for people to know, I was like that typical former fat kid, right? Like I grew up in a really unathletic, out of shape, overweight. That was my whole thing until high school. Decided to get my life together. But I had these principles that I did have from music that I realized translated really well. Like I kind of just like got it when it came to learning fitness, because I had this in the background, at least in a general sense, principles of discipline, focus, progression, all that sort of stuff, right? Even principles of fluctuation and waving intensity. And so like there's a lot of structural similarities there. So there was a general background help of being kind of formed in a musical way that definitely gave me certain advantages when it came to fitness or starting my own business or anything else. So I've come to see enormous value in a musical education, hence why I'm forcing all my kids to learn. Fortunately, they all like it, right? But to learn piano and start early with a musical education and perform, right? That's another thing, like, you know, really being able to just get up and get on the platform, so to speak, right? And just, it's just you, and you either pull it off or you don't, right? I think that's a really valuable thing to train for and actually do.
Because I suppose that's managing nerves and managing state, isn't it? And
absolutely,
arousal and all that kind of stuff that can be tied to sport and training and music and performance and all those things. Yeah.
As any athlete or musician will tell you, it's one thing to like have something nailed perfectly in your bedroom closet on the guitar. It's another thing to pull that off even at 80% proficiency when you're standing up and there's wind and weather and you're sweating and there's all these people looking at you, right? That's totally different. Nothing can really adequately prepare you for that. It's only something that you can get good at by doing it, right? Yeah. Sorry, Peter, you wanted to say something? Yep.
What's it like on stage? I've seen some of the videos of you doing this stuff actually on stage. It's great. But what's it like on stage? So you must make mistakes. right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
I've always
absolutely. I'm
found it
human. Yeah.
fascinating because even like I remember watching a Marcus Miller video once years ago, and he's like obviously ridiculously good on the bass, and he's been playing it his whole life, and he's what's he in his 60s now or something.
Yep.
And he still makes you still see him make mistakes, but he doesn't stop and go, oh sorry. He just carried on. And you hardly
Yes.
even notice it. And there's
Yeah.
even an old clip of Bob Marley. I think it might be his bass player, he like plays a bum note.
Yep.
And Bob Marley starts singing, watch what you're doing, watch what you need. The crowd
see,
starts chanting it
yeah.
back.
That's what you do. So I have a whole philosophy of mistakes. It's really important as a performer. Like you better be thinking about how to navigate this. Because look, I don't care how good you are. If you are not a robot, even if you are a robot, but especially if you're human, mistakes are going to happen.
Yeah.
So how do you minimize them and how do you navigate them when they occur? Especially for the band I'm in, like we play some pretty damn tough stuff. We're doing a lot of Van Halen. We do some extreme, and any guitarist, and like I try to be faithful to that stuff. We've got everything from Eruption to Get the Funk Out on our set, like which demands a lot of me, a lot, like right at the edge of my abilities on a lot of this stuff. And so like when those songs come up on the set, like swallow hard, especially if it's like cold out because we're in Wisconsin and your hands are kind of cramped, what do you do? What do you do? Well, the first thing you do is like you practice the hell out of this stuff as much as you can before any performance, right? There's nothing that's ever going to replace that, right? That you just have as much deep muscle memory and competency as you can in that controlled environment before you get to the wilds of live performance. But then you have backup plans, right? Now, the first thing is when a mistake happens, and this is something my old instructor taught me, but it's something that even Eddie Van Halen himself said. He's like, if you hit a wrong note, hit it again and hit it with even more force and just make it seem like you meant to do it, right? And if you're a guitarist, there's little tricks. If you hit a wrong note, hit it again and start to bend it and bend it and bend it till it sounds like the right note. And then it makes it seem like you knew what you were like. So there's or hit the whammy bar and dive down till you get back. There's all sorts of like recovery tricks that you learn as a guitarist where if you do them well, you can kind of catch yourself, even if you're playing without a net, if that makes sense. And the vast majority of people are never going to know the difference, right? Some purist out there might be like, okay, you didn't totally nail that, but that's like one person at most in the crowd, right? The vast majority of people are like, that's awesome, man, right? So you gotta have the confidence. As soon as you say, oops, sorry, or somebody's calling you out on stage as a band member, that's not good, right? You don't want to do that. You have to have the confidence and you have to have these kind of ways that because mistakes are going to happen, that you can recover quickly from mistakes. And I've got a whole bag. Every person who's been doing this in music has a whole bag of tricks for covering your mistakes are going to happen. And then, you kind of understand like, okay, here's a section of a tune that like I've got like an 80% stick rate on when it's live, right? And that's just as realistic as it's going to get, right? Just because of the various. So like, what can I do to like make sure that like my probabilities are at least? And sometimes it's simple things like, like when I play, I hold my guitar pretty low, because like that's what the cool kids do, right? You shouldn't do that because mechanically it's bad. You should hold your guitar like a nerd, but that doesn't look cool, so I hold it low. So like when I'm playing certain tunes, I know like if I'm holding it low, like my hit rate is going to go to like 40% on the tough stuff, not 8. So like I better go find something to put my leg up on for these passages, right? And like boost the probability. Sometimes the best you can do is just boost the probabilities of success. And there's little tricks like that you learn. And people have analogs of this of many different areas of life, right? But for music, that's it. It's confidence comes first, right? If you have a mistake, own that mistake and have ways of quickly recovering, and then just kind of understand the environment, the landscape, the areas of the set that are going to give you the most trouble and what you can do to boost the likelihood of success at any of those scenarios, right? And that's just a lot of these lessons, like nobody taught me them. You just learn them because you learn them the hard way, unfortunately, right? Yeah.
Very quickly, this is sort of connected, but not. But there's a comedian, he's dead now, he's been dead for years, but a comedian called Les Dawson, an English comedian. And part of his career, he was really funny. And part of his career, he would play the piano, but play it wrong. So he'd be playing a tune and you knew what the tune was, and he just hit bum notes all over the place, but purposefully. Which, I remember years ago, people would say that's harder to do than actually play it properly. So if you have some of your spontaneity time on YouTube, just look up Les Dawson because it's hilarious.
I'm going to put a note down there for that. Actually, that sounds great. Yeah.
Les Dawson playing the piano. It's honestly, it's brilliant. You might even be able to incorporate it into your show.
I got it. Thank you. Yeah.
Anyway. So Pat, what we'll start to kind of wrap up, unfortunately. I mean, it's been amazing talking to you because I know you've got your guitar lesson coming up, I think, after this. So but maybe we can speak again at some stage because I know
I would love to. Yeah,
we've kind of had a nice overall introduction to you, which has been fascinating, but we've kind of picked bits and gone kind of all over the place, which is amazing. From just I suppose just a more practical question for you, that just be in terms of your own training now, being a minimalist and a generalist, and having the experience that you have, and being as busy as you are. What does your kind of training week look like for yourself now, in terms of the amount of time that you actually train, in terms of days per week and the time, and is it more kettlebell complexes and things? I mean, for your actual training where you're at now, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, the structure has been generally the same for many years. What switches really is just the amount of volume I'm doing, depending on how many other obligations I have in life. I find that volume's kind of the variable that needs to be adjusted, most frequently. And like, it can be very simple. Like sometimes in busier, more demanding times of life, I just have 2 really intense training days per week instead of 3, for example, right? And usually sometimes that's just it. So yeah, it's like, I always kind of like to talk about it as like being a pyramid. If you can imagine like the food pyramid at the bottom, there's like the vegetables of fitness. That's just walking and mobility. That's every day. That's stuff that you can get the whole family involved in, walk with your wife and kids, and that's a good thing to do, right? So do that every day, and that's cumulative. Do it throughout the day. Take your walk in the morning, lunch, evening, whatever. Do your T-spine mobilizations, all that good stuff, right? I'm sure your gentle listeners are familiar with all that good stuff. So do that every day. Then in the middle, that's your sort of, strength and hypertrophy efforts. That's the 2 to 3 days a week that I'm talking about. Always kind of trying to hit between the 10 to 15 hard sets per major muscle group and movement pattern per week. I'm a basics guy, right? I think that I really like the idea that mastery is not moving away from the basics. It's just deeper into them, really owning them. So I'm a basics guy. Push, pull, hinge, squat, carry. Yeah, right. And then at the top of the sort of pyramid, that's where you have the metabolic conditioning and the complexes and stuff like that. For me these days, it's like 1 to 2 days per week. Sometimes I do it after the strength training, sometimes on separate days. And 15 to 20-ish minutes I find is really perfectly sufficient for that type of work. And with a structure like that, I find that it's very, very easy to fit that into an otherwise very busy lifestyle. And it works well. I don't know if you're going to go like set any major world records with it, but that's right. That most people aren't too concerned about doing that anyways.
So in terms of your strength and hypertrophy stuff, like you said, the middle section of the pyramid, where you would presumably you're going to go to, like you said, the local Y or the gym to do it. Right. Does that look like, is that mainly kettlebell, or is that barbell stuff?
It's a mixed modality. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So even though I love the kettlebell, obviously, I've always been a guy of like, hey, if there's a killer app, use it, right? So like, I love kettlebells, but look, when I do my deadlifts or rack pulls, I'm using a barbell, right? Now at the same time, I think the kettlebell is great for anybody who just wants to have a very minimalist, if you will, setup at home, where the kettlebell. The thing about the kettlebell is it's really broad in what it can do, but it's also still sufficiently deep, right? It can cover the strength, the hypertrophy, the mobility, the conditioning, and it can get most people, most of the time, all the depth they could ever want from those things. But at the same time, like, I go to the gym and there's barbells there and dumbbells there and kettlebells there. I'm just going to pick whatever tool is best for whatever lift I have to do that day.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm using it all. Right.
Using it all. Cool. Pete, any final thoughts before we wrap up with Pat for this one?
Do you know what? Nothing specific, because we've covered so much that, you know, it's just been really good to have a chat. Yeah, and just a kind of little insight into how you do things, because like I say, I mean, I've followed you for like 10 years, and just seeing you move from doing like the kettlebell stuff, you had the nutrition book out. I think you said that was how you met Dan John. You had the nutrition for dummies sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just like how you've just moved through into all these different things and just kind of flowed through them all. And I find it hugely inspiring, because I'm not trying to do the same thing, but I'm trying to get a little bit more philosophical about things, and a little, like, the training wise, I've got that, but I never used to. When I was overweight and out of shape into my mid-30s, and didn't really start thinking about anything until then. So I'm sort of like years behind on that, but it doesn't matter. That's what I've been learning, is like, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can always start, right? So it's just been really interesting to watch. Watch you move through all of these things and do them all really well as well, or perceived to be really well on social media, let's be. But
it's always a secret.
Yeah. No, it's been great, because it just shows it can be done as well. So yeah.
Well, thank you. No, that really means a lot, Peter, and it's really great to. I know we've been kind of loosely connected, I guess, on social media land for a while, and it's always really, really great and nice to have something like this, actually get to connect a little bit more formally. Hopefully we'll be able to sit down in person someday. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Pat, so if people who are listening, because not a lot of our listeners are not kind of fitness people or trainers, they're everyday people who may not be familiar with you prior to listening to the podcast. What's the best kind of way for people to continue to maybe follow you and to find out more? I mean, what platforms are you most active on? What's the best place for people to go?
I'm on all the major ones, but the easiest way to get linked up with all of it would be to get on my email list. That's where I think I share the most content, and people seem to get a lot out of it. So if you go to the website 101 kettlebellworkouts.com, 101 kettlebellworkouts.com, that'll give you a nice free, it's a PDF of literally 101 kettlebell workouts, totally free. That'll get you on the email list, and then you'll get an email like pretty quickly that will have a link to like my YouTube and my Instagram, and you can link up with any of those you want after that.
Excellent. Perfect. We will put that in the notes when this goes out. That'd be fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. It's been great talking to you. And like I say, I as well been following you and watching your stuff for years. And to we've obviously had Dan on a lot, and I know you do a lot of work with him as well.
Yep.
And you're close with Dan, so it's great to finally get you on the podcast. And like you say, hopefully we'll do it again in the future, and maybe have something. I love the conversations that are flowing and open and could go anywhere, but maybe we'll have something a bit more directed in the future, around a certain topic that we can decide between us. But no, that's fantastic, Pat. Thanks so much for being on. Hope your guitar lesson in a minute is fantastic.
I hope so too. I did my homework. I try to be a good student, so we'll see.
Okay, so thank you very much for everybody for listening. We are now, like I say, into our 4th year, and what a great way to kick that off with Pat as a guest. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave a review if you're listening or watching on a platform that allows you to do so. And if you would like to come into the Facebook group, just go onto groups in Facebook, search Health Oddity, and one of us will let you in. We will be back next week. I think we'll be back with Paul as well, and we will be able to give you some stories and some updates from the Britain's strongest disabled man and woman that Pete and I will be at this weekend. Yeah, we said it a few weeks ago, because but next week we'll have an update on it for you. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and we will see you next week for episode 158. Bye-bye.